What would ruin your life by just trying once? Story 1. I have a huge fear of accidentally hitting someone with my car at night. I have a friend who was driving home from dropping his buddy at the airport off at 2 a.m. Going along the highway, nothing weird happened, a normal calm night. Then boom, buddy hears and feels a massive impact against his 4x4, gains control of the car, slows down, and investigates. Is it a person, or was a person, just bent up on the road from rolling under my friend's truck? Fast forward a few hours and the cops are called. They're there asking questions and identifying the corpse. Buddy gets taken in for more questioning about the speed he is going, etc. Eventually, the cops release him with no charges. He asks if something happened. They identified the deceased and contacted his family. Turns out his family had been contacting a different police station for hours trying to find their son. The story goes something happened in his life and he said goodbye to his family cryptically before disappearing for hours. The conclusion was he decided to commit suicide by lying on the highway. My friend just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Didn't make what my buddy went through any easier. It took him years to get over it. I work at a Freightliner dealership and a truck got towed in with some damage to the right front corner. The busted headlight and hood mirror weren't major damage. Found out they towed it because it was involved in a truck versus person collision. A man had parked his car on the shoulder of the highway like it was disabled. He ducked down in front of it and waited for the right moment, then jumped out in front of a truck and trailer. Obviously, he accomplished his goal. I noticed a few small pieces of clothing stuck to the front of the truck. I heard the driver was, needless to say, shaken up pretty badly. This happens a lot with trains during the winter months in my state. My dad was pretty shaken the first time it happened when he was on his commuter train home and was shocked no one else seemed to care. Then it happened again the next week, and again a few weeks later, etc. People just become numb to it after a while or get angry because it forces everyone to leave the train and take the bus. It unfortunately happens quite a bit with trains. When I was a kid, I lived 2 blocks from the tracks and it happened at least 4 times that I could remember. Twice in a car purposefully pulling onto the tracks and twice someone jumping. Probably happened more and I just don't remember. It's a pretty effective but messed up way to go because you're gonna traumatize people. My cousin, who is 34 now, is still terrified of trains because both of the cars ended up in their backyard. He was only 9 years old. When my brother was 13, he and some friends were out on their bikes when a train came by. They decided to cross the tracks anyway. I don't think anyone was trying to kill themselves, but well, dumbass boys are dumbasses. My brother was in front and he said he felt the air from the train drag the back of his bike. His friend didn't make it. He swore he heard him screaming, but the cops said he would have died on impact. They had midnight vigils for that kid for years. He still has a cross at that intersection. Story 2. Negligent homicide. I'm sure self-defense killings are not as difficult to handle as it is justified, not saying everyone would be fine, but negligent homicide is another level. If you drive drunk, text while driving, or do not pay attention and smack into a pedestrian, you're going to live in a nightmare. Was driving home with my dad one night, like 1 a.m. Wasn't going fast, like 30 kilometers per hour, and this random kid came from nowhere. I evaded him but damaged the front of my car pretty badly. When I got out of the car, I was furious. What kid plays at freaking 1 a.m. in the street? I was ready to throw hands with whoever the stupid parent could be. Frickin' prime Mike Tyson, I don't give a fuck. Then I understood. The kid was from a homeless family sleeping inside of a tent in the street, and the kid waited till his parents got asleep to play. God damn, my heart sank. Mother was hyper apologetic. Dad was furious with the kid. I couldn't do anything. The kid was already in trouble. Obviously, they didn't have the money. Talking with the dad was like, it's okay, don't be too harsh with the kid. Got in the car, called the insurance, and ended up paying like $5K for the fix. Sometime later, talking with my dad, he told me something like, $5K is a cheap price for not carrying a dead kid in your conscience. I imagined the picture if I didn't evade him. Yeah, he was right. Stopped crying after that. One night, I was soberly driving my grandmother home from a family gathering. On my way down an unlit country road, I saw a dark figure on the road and reacted immediately by swerving onto the other lane at about 40 to 50 miles per hour. My poor grandmother was like, "What was that?" And she's deaf, so I couldn't properly communicate to her while driving that we almost hit a person. On my way back home through the same route, there were a number of emergency vehicles about 20 feet from where I had swerved. Turns out someone else after me had hit the person, and he immediately passed. I feel so sorry for that driver. It scared the hell out of me to avoid him, and I can't imagine what it would have been like to actually hit him. A couple of days later, it was in the local paper that the victim was a homeless man. To this day, it bothers me to see people wear dark clothing while walking or biking on the street at night. A former classmate classmate and sort of childhood friend of mine died at age 14 in 2004. He was hit by a car while on his bike. Drunk driver. The young woman never recovered from that. Friends of the kid would show up at her job years after, even at her house, to throw rocks, humiliate her in whatever ways. I don't know what else. But besides the legal and internal trouble, there's also that possibility of third parties taking it out on you. We have a friend who, absolutely zero fault of theirs, killed somebody completely by accident. Somebody stole a scooter and was driving back roads with no lights on. They ran a stop sign and our friend T-boned them going 45 plus on their way home. No street lights, and they never saw this person until they were directly in front of them. This was like 12 years ago and it still haunts her occasionally. Even if it was 100% not your fault or self-defense, I can't imagine it's easy. Story 3. Reconnecting with people who were bad influences on you. You'd be surprised how quickly one can return to their old ways. I Facebook messaged a friend from an old life. It was 2 messages before he was playing to remember things we did in our ignorant youth, and asking me to confess we did things together. He never gave that stuff up and went far deeper. I regret those times. We grew up in filth and I've never looked back. He was so smart and he squandered it. You have to escape the ghosts of who you were and embrace who you are now. Never let your past dictate your future. You can't drag them up, they just drag you down. This is literally what I did after my mom died. We had a codependent opiate addiction thing going on. I ran away from my crappy house, ran upstate and went NC with every friend, but the one who fully supported my decision to get out. I knew he would support me, so he was the only one I told. LMFAO, everyone else got nothing. Now I've been clean for almost 10 years. I have a steady scheduled job running food service and training for a convenience store that pays fairly well and has decent benefits, and that I absolutely love. Beats the stress and culture of drugs that comes with working on the line. We live with and help care for my mother-in-law and her brother who has severe Down syndrome. He's 60, which is wild for someone like that. My husband and I just bought my first new car from a dealership, something I never in a million years thought I'd be able to do. My life is good now, and all because when I decided to get out, I got all the way out. Sometimes it's either that or being alone. A friend from childhood is in this boat. He alienated most of the people in his life over the decades from both poor choices and mental issues. At this point, I am the only person from his childhood who still talks to him. The only family left alive is a single sister, and she finally had enough 15 years ago. So he only has a few people who he sees regularly, and they're just users. He's given up on life and says while he isn't actually suicidal, he would welcome death. Yeah, I'm currently learning this lesson. They may not have been bad influences on me, but my cousin, like 15 years older than me, was an addict, and my mom helped him get clean. He lived with us for my teen years. Years later, I'm disabled and need some help around the house, and he's still got his act together, so I offer to let him and his girlfriend move in with me. Things are great for a year or so, then he relapses, which leads to her relapsing. Now I have to deal with their empty promises to get better while constantly begging me for money, and I can't even figure out how to get them out of my house. They trashed my house, stole my money, pawned my stuff, and still cursed me out when I didn't give them my drug money, and I still can't get rid of them. Story 4. As an older guy in the trades, mess around with safety. I've seen enough people mess their livelihood up by taking a stupid, unnecessary chance. It's always a shame when you hear of a young tradesperson dying because you know they probably don't know better or didn't work with people who were teaching them how to do it safely. The #1 rule is to come home at the end of each day. I wish more answers on this post were like yours. I've had someone die in the workplace because they didn't lock a moving staircase, and it's just ridiculous the number of people I see climbing on crap they shouldn't in order to get a job done a couple of minutes quicker. I'm a custodian at a middle school. We had a leak in the roof and needed to get into a cupboard that was near the ceiling to clean up the water and put a bucket up to catch the leak. I said I'll go grab the ladder and go do just that. When I came back, my coworker was sitting on the ground holding his foot, and the teacher was calling the office. The chair he was standing on was on its side and in the middle of the room. He broke his ankle, got reprimanded, and had to take a bunch of safety classes over. And I had to clean up the mess by myself and cover the rest of his shift. Not the point, but irritating nonetheless. My dad works in a steel mill, and there is an exterior conveyor belt for the large pipe to move along towards the storing and loading area. The conveyor belt is electrically controlled, and the pipe moves at about 20 kilometers an hour along the conveyor. The pipes that move along the conveyor belt are between 10 inches and 14 inches in diameter. There is a main door in which, to access, you have to hit an emergency stop off the conveyor belt and flip up a section on the conveyor in order it to cross and access the door. The important step is hitting the emergency stop because you can still flip up the conveyor without hitting stop, which still sends pipes down the line. There are signs everywhere near the section of the conveyor stating the steps and procedure to access the door, the rate of speed of the pipe on the conveyor, and many other safety warnings. In the early 2000s, there was an employee who did not hit the emergency stop when a 14-inch x 20-foot pipe came down the conveyor belt. It effectively cut him in half. My dad was supervising in the loading yard that day and saw the whole thing from across the yard. Nobody wants to see a coworker killed in such a gruesome way, and he did not die immediately either. He bled out during the hour it took the ambulance to arrive. When I was an apprentice, the hardest thing was standing up to people who had been in the trade for 15 years and asked you to do blatantly unsafe work. I was nearly fired from a job for not going into a confined space that was 10 feet below ground, with the work area being several hundred feet away. There were no air monitors, and the radio relay was dead, so 200 feet in, you'd lose communication. The best part was our staging area was less than 15 minutes away, where they had charged air monitors and relays. Luckily, the safety officer just happened to stop by that morning and saw the foreman in my face. Apparently, I was the reason no one else would go down to work. The safety guy made it a point to stop by our site first every morning. Unfortunately, I was moved to the worst job on the site, but I felt better knowing the people in the confined space had working equipment. My supervisor got pissed off at me because I refused to lift him into the air on a pallet with a forklift to run an Ethernet cable in the ceiling of a warehouse. I wouldn't have done it with a brand new forklift, but this one was very old and in poor condition too, with a very touchy, jerky clutch and brakes. I've run lots of cables in forklift baskets, but I told him I wasn't going up on a pallet. He angrily told me, "Fine, well lift me up and I'll do it." I told him no, neither of us was going up on a pallet. He tells me, "Yes, you're going to do it." I stood my ground and told him, in fact, no, I'm not. And because I've been working for the company long enough and know my value, I followed it up with, "What are you going to do? Fire me?" We ended up borrowing a basket from somewhere, and a few minutes into using it, he was like, "Yeah, that pallet would have been a bad idea with this forklift." You never know. Standing your ground on legitimate safety issues might have saved lives. Story 5. Road rage. The guy I went to middle school with jumped out of his car and beat a guy he was road raging with so badly that he was partially paralyzed by the end of it. The guy was 19 and got a 45-year prison sentence, completely messed up his whole life and will only have a few years on the outside. And that's if he's lucky and lives that long. One moment of anger leads to a lifetime of regret. I had an uncle who was driving on the freeway and the car in front was brake checking him. He swerves to cut in front of the car and slams the brakes to brake check the other guy. They crashed and both had serious injuries, but luckily they were both fine in the end. So stupid to let road rage consume you. Someone once threw a large rock at my car while I was going from the service road to the highway. He was in his car next to me, window down, full force, me driving full speed. It could have been deadly. Fortunately, he didn't hit a window or metal. He hit the little plastic door handle. I know I should have pressed charges, as I did get his license plate, but I was terrified of bringing a psychopath into my life. I think of it often. I know that he could do it again, and I could have been part of stopping him, but he had to be somewhat crazy. He had a rock in the car next to him. One can only surmise that it was the rock's purpose. Nuts. My girlfriend and I watched a person in a pickup truck try to kill somebody on the road. Somebody passed the pickup truck on the highway, but the pickup truck couldn't deal with it. He sped up to where the other car couldn't get back into the lane, and the car was about 1.6 seconds from a head-on collision with a car on the other side of the road. People are freaking crazy. If you are that pissed off while driving, you should have your privileges to drive revoked. I have never even gotten frustrated while driving. I'm a delivery driver, and the other day I was on my last delivery and had just picked up my 5-year-old, so she was in the car with me. I get to the apartment complex and pull up to the driveway to look for the apartment unit, which was difficult to find. This guy gets out of his truck screaming and lunging at me at the top of his lungs. At first, it was unintelligible and I had no idea what he was rambling. I was terrified for me and my child. He was screaming, "Don't park there! That's the fire lane! You'll get towed!" I wasn't even parking. He had no right to be screaming at me. I wanted to tell him off so badly, but you just never know how people will react. I remember reading a story about a mother who had her child in her car when she came across a dude who cut her off. So she flipped him off, and then he came back and shot at her car, which ended up hitting her kid. The poor thing cried, "Mommy, my tummy hurts," while he died in his mother's arms. I'll never forget that story. So when I encounter someone with road rage, I never match their energy. You never know how someone will react. Story 6. Jumping into an unknown body of water head first. Seen it happen where some idiot jumps in head first and paralyzes himself. Sad, but it happens in less than 5 seconds. This nearly happened to me about 10 years ago. I was at a lake in Minnesota with a former partner at her family's property, and there were 2 docks you could hang out on. One was too shallow to dive, and the other was fine. Stupid me was hanging out and drinking and totally forgot I was on the shallow dock. Dove headfirst and totally hit my face on the lake bottom. Felt a crunch in my neck as well. I'm very fortunate all that happened was I bruised up my forehead a bit. I think about that moment often. About 25 years ago, I was on vacation in Aruba as a teenager. My parents had talked to a husband and wife on the plane, just married, and this was their honeymoon. They ended up staying at the same resort as us, the Divvy, I think. We arrived via bus at the same time, but their room wasn't ready yet, so the husband decided to go for a swim while they waited. He did one of those running towards the shoreline while taking off your shirt and kicking your sandals to the side shuffle steps. He was really excited to get into the water. He ran right into the water and dove face first as a wave was going out into like an inch of water. Full scorpion, whole body weight diving face first while sprinting. Broke his neck and died. I will never ever understand why human civilization puts so much emphasis on teaching people to enter bodies of water head first in general, to the point where it's so many people's instinct to do this bizarrely risky thing at every opportunity, even with completely unknown and/or outdoor bodies of water. It's as if when we taught people to drive, part of it was teaching them to always blindly peel out of a parking space at max speed, like an indie driver coming out of the pit. Why? Well, it gets you on the road faster, people insist. It's more fun and reduces drag. What? You're not in a race. If you have to jump in, just do it normally like any kid before they're taught to do it in the most unnecessarily risky way possible. I took swimming lessons from an early childhood throughout my teens and am a strong swimmer in every aspect, save for diving. My body could just never overcome the instinct of this is idiotic. Why would I ever choose to do this head first instead of any other way? Story 7. Losing your temper. You can be the nicest, calmest person your entire life, but everyone will always remember that one time you got angry. For sure, that's why my rule is to never make big decisions in anger. I've done some pretty impactful things in my life, but every time I did it, it was with a cool head, and I never came to regret any of them. Plus, because I don't often speak in anger, actually raising my voice tends to get attention. My kid cousin cried when I shouted at him because he was doing something dangerous, since he'd never heard me shout before, but he stopped, and I don't think I could have gotten to him in time otherwise. And my aunt and uncle shout all the time. Turns out kids just get used to it. Gotta say, that describes me to a T. Nicest, the calmest person on the planet. Always gets comments on it. One day, this gal on my project team pushed me beyond my limits. I exploded in front of the whole team of upper management, slamming my palm on the table. Everyone quieted and moved on. I just knew I was going to get fired when the CFO showed up in my office later. He said, "Until you did that, I honestly didn't think you gave a C about this project. Good move." I learned it's not a career killer if you're strategic about it. I'm dealing with this with my mom right now. Her heart was in the right place and she did sometimes put in an effort to be a good parent, but she had issues with her temper, and my memories of emotional abuse and occasional violence greatly overshadow the many instances where she was super cool and awesome. It's really difficult to reconcile one with the other. I learned a lesson from her about how important it was to show self-restraint and not lose control, especially around children. This is what kills it for many NDs. We have emotional dysregulation, or what I like to call emotional flow. We feel it, express it, and move on. The NT version seems to be repressing it, ruminating on it, then holding a grudge for 5 decades. But what sucks for them, and I've seen it in this way too, is that they don't really express excitement either. It's just this emotionless roboticism. So yeah, when I'm angry, sometimes I raise my voice because I'm angry. Duh. But when I'm excited, I turn into a 5-year-old on Christmas, even over how beautiful a sunset can be. The latter draws people in. The wide interests that ADHD brings keeps them in longer because it seems like I've had an interesting life, and then one little blip of anger and they'll banish me from the island for life. And then I'll move somewhere else and start the process yet again, this time with one more location of experiences they'll ask about, as they pretend to care about me as a human being. Story 8. Never seen a happy crackhead, and I hear it only takes once. Yeah, the first few times you use it, you're like, hey, this is pretty great. I can do this off and on, and I don't need it every day. Then you start doing it more and more, and you tell yourself that you won't let it get a hold of you. You're somehow different and special compared to the millions of people addicted to it. Then one day you wake up sick and slowly start putting it before everything else in your life. You start to miss work and other obligations, you run through your money and then start doing other things to supplement. You beg, borrow, or steal until you can't anymore. Next thing you know, you're in full-blown addiction and will tell yourself every lie to justify it to yourself. So happy I'm done with that crap. Drugs are terrible things. I've always said meth is the one drug I'll never try even once. I enjoyed recreational Adderall when I was younger, way more than I should have, but managed to curb it without permanently messing up my brain chemistry too bad. I know meth would be 1,000 times more addictive. Like, imagine one day you wake up and all of a sudden everything that used to bring you joy in life pales in comparison to this one thing. Friends, family, alcohol, hobbies, food, love, sex. None of them can even touch the feeling of this one thing that temporarily takes all of your problems away and supplies you with so much dopamine you feel like you're on top of the world. Who wouldn't continue chasing that high? Who is actually strong enough to say, screw it, I'd rather live the gray, drab, pleasureless existence I've unfortunately doomed myself to instead of getting just one more fix? It's scary. Story 9. Pet the bison. Jump in the hot spring. Climb the rail. Hike into the desert when everyone and their mother told you not to. National parks are a gauntlet of Darwinian temptation, and the warnings are everywhere. The NPS bends over backwards to try to save you from yourself. There's a sign on an ARCS hike saying you shouldn't do it in high heels, and yet people refuse to learn. I watched a kid nearly fall to his death in YNP. I can't remember the name of the place, but I could drive you there. They climbed over the stone wall and out to a pillar outcropping right past the wall. As he was climbing up, he slipped and managed to stop himself. It was easily a 300-foot fall off the ledge. And yeah, numerous folks being nearly gored by bison or elk. They just aren't scary enough to warrant concern, I guess. Whenever I go to parks or areas outside the climate and familiar biome, I'm always extremely cognizant of the warning signs. Why isn't the desert scary to me? Because I've never almost died of dehydration and heat stroke. Avalanches and bison? I know what they'll do to me. The things I don't know about are way scarier. I heard someone say that all the conspiracy theories of all the disappearances in national parks are just because the average human will do stupid things against all odds. Chalk it up to ignorance, overconfidence, or just stupidity. I have a park ranger friend who told me that a lot of people just hear park in national park and think it's a bigger version of their neighborhood park. They'll just park the car, explore, and be done by sunset. So they'll just wear flip-flops, no water bottles, sunscreen, snacks, etc., and just go journeying down a completely not flat trail. Story 10. Any sort of criminal charge because I would lose my nursing license. My first cousin was a brilliant RN, absolutely mind-blowingly brilliant. She got hooked on narcotics after dental surgery, started stealing meds from her workplace, got caught, cleaned, back on drugs, repeats. She was given so many second and third and on chances, finally lost her license. She ended up in her 40s taking her own life by attempting to amputate her left arm. I guess the brachial artery left so much blood throughout her home that when her son found her days later, police investigation first thought she'd been murdered. I can't begin to tell you how awful it was for the entire extended family, a small community, and her friends. There was a story about this on one of these threads, about the quickest you've seen someone ruin their life. It was someone who just graduated from nursing school after 7 years of study and qualifications aimed at getting their license. Day 1 in their first job, they steal medication. Their career instantly ends and the license is revoked. They can never work in the medical field again. Story 11. Foraging and picking mushrooms you cannot identify. My aunt had neighbors who used to go camping and forage for mushrooms. On one of those trips, they made a stew with some mushrooms they had found. The entire family, 2 adults and 3 kids, died from eating that stew. My aunt wouldn't even eat store-bought mushrooms after that. It's really easy to do. A lot of foraged food has doubts that look almost exactly alike, and you have to rely on other things to help ID them. There are also a lot of foraged foods that are completely safe to eat, but you have to process them first. Like, I forget which type of mushroom it is, but you can eat them. But in order to eat them safely, You have to boil/blanch them first, and then cook them again in whatever dish you're making. If you don't do that first step, they can make you really ill. Stomach cramps, nausea, vomiting, chills, the whole 9 yards. But if you boil them that first time, then they're perfectly fine. I mentioned the mushroom murders above, and the woman used death caps, which have several completely safe doubts, like gypsy mushrooms, button mushrooms, and puffball mushrooms, all of which are perfectly safe to eat. Some of them can be eaten completely raw. Story 12. Fentanyl. I have seen scary documentaries on this. I watched it because I'm prescribed fentanyl patches for my chronic pain. I'm in the UK, so I don't know if it's different in the US, and they are strict about controlled drugs due to the opioid crisis. But it's the only drug that means I'm independent and mobile at my pain. Without it, I become disabled and highly in need of care. But I would imagine if I tried street fentanyl, I'd become addicted. I get what you're saying. Fentanyl in the pharmaceutical form is effective, regulated, and safe. Man-made fentanyl being disguised as Adderall or Xanax is killing. My area of the country is one of the most affected by this, and it's scary. A child in our school district died recently thinking he was taking Adderall to help him study, but got fentanyl instead. Do you have any more info on the Adderall-fentanyl connection? I fully believe you. In New York City, some poor kid died because they picked up a laced vape. A silly little weed vape, practically harmless, medically had fent put in it. Smugglers are mass-producing fake Adderall, Percocet, and Oxy. The pills are actually fentanyl or meth, but they look convincing. Adolescents are particularly vulnerable since they are in a risk-taking stage of life as it is. The kid in our area who died felt a lot of pressure to perform well academically and thought taking Adderall would help him study. He bought a pill from a friend's brother and it turned out not to be Adderall but fentanyl. Story 13. Cheating on my wife. I know a couple of guys that brag about all the women they pull when they're on nights out, and their girlfriends or wives are at home. It makes me think that if I did that, I wouldn't be able to live with the guilt. How can they do it as if it's normal? Losing my wife, my kids, our family, and how hard we have to work to build it all? It's crazy. My husband cheated on me. We have 2 children together. I left. I had nowhere to go but back home to Italy because that's where my family is, and I was extremely depressed in the US. He agreed it was best for the kids to have access to a large and supportive family. He lost his wife and only saw his 2 children in the summer because he just couldn't stop cheating. Surprise, surprise, he wants me back because, as it turns out, getting with a woman because she's hot and has huge tits doesn't make her the dream girl, and turns out she's an alcoholic with control issues, and he desperately wants me back. Nope, I'm done with his BS, and our kids are growing up in Rome right now. Story 14. Hitting someone while driving drunk or half drunk or having any alcohol in the blood, actually. When I was younger, I didn't really care as long as I didn't pass the limit, so I drank 2 beers and went on in my car. One night I was driving on an 80km/h road somewhere in the countryside with no pavement and quite far from any cities or villages, so I was careless. At some point I passed a person walking on the side of the road with no lights on them or whatever. Nothing at all. I saw them the moment I passed them. Thankfully nothing happened, but I didn't have a lot of room when I passed, since I was quite careless on the road, where there's very little traffic. I was almost driving in the middle of the road. It's been 5 or 6 years now, and from time to time I think of the almost accident and how it could have easily killed someone and ruined their family's lives. And of course I would be sitting in a jail cell instead of answering this post. Since that day I refuse to drink even 1 small glass of beer if I have to drive. Hell, it can happen when you're stone sober too. Around here people love to wear black clothing with no reflectors and walk down the side of the road after dark. Even after being careful, I've had some near misses that made me scream. And these people are playing Invisible Man on the stretch of road that has a fresh memorial with flowers to someone who was struck and killed on that road. But if you don't have a car in the USA, you're basically screwed. The county isn't adding more shoulders or any kind of pedestrian support. I'm terrified I'll hit one of these careless, clueless peds against my will. I'm furious I'm forced to drive a pedestrian whacker to get anywhere. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.